I'm really excited to have Tamara and Peter here from the Washington State Able Savings and Developmental Disabilities Endowment Trust Fund experts in our presence today. So I'll turn the table over to Tamara and Peter, unless Tanya, do you have anything to add? Okay. Sounds like Peter has control of an awesome PowerPoint for us, and we'll just let him take over. Thank you for coming today.
And I assume everybody can see the lead slide. Awesome. Thank you for inviting us. We're happy to be here. There might be some background noise behind me. Just let me know. I got kids that have been playing out in the snow, and so they're taking their baths now. And also we have some dogs, so let me know if they start barking. I don't hear that all the time anymore. We're gonna try to do this in 3 parts. So we give a brief overview, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the program. But you know, the DD Endowment is a special needs trust fund program, and then ABLE is the 529 savings plan that came out a couple of years ago. And so we'll kind of do a compare and contrast between the two. But you may have some specific scenarios. Go ahead and throw those at us if you have those questions. But again, we're going to dance around, maybe even, and avoid giving you legal or financial advice. So certainly, you know, let us know your questions. We'll try to answer them. But if my answer gets kind of vague, it's probably because I can't give you financial advice. And that's where we've got other people on the line that perhaps could do that. And there are, you know, attorneys, financial planners and stuff like that that are great resources to help you, guide you through this process. We're trying to set the context of, you know, financial empowerment tools, equality, equity in our households. Is there a national survey just came out recently last year, and they were able to actually quantify how much it costs if you have a disability in your household. So they're almost $18,000 to be equal to everybody else. You need to earn an extra $18,000 because of the cost of a disability. But really, this is what both ABLE and Special Needs Trust solves for, is the asset limitation if the beneficiary, the account owner is on some type of public benefit program. And these are typically federal programs that might be implemented by a state agency or even a local housing authority. And it's really the $2,000 asset limitation that these programs solve. And ABLE, in a nutshell, is very similar to the 529 college savings programs. It allows folks to contribute money into a savings or an investment vehicle that's tax advantaged, meaning that there's tax savings or not needing to pay taxes on the money in their earnings. Very, very clean, but very new program. Only, you know, December 2014 is when it got passed by Congress. I'm going to skip over to Tamara a little bit. I'm going to do this one. So Special Needs Trust is defined in Social Security Act versus the IRS tax code like ABLE. And specifically, this Special Needs Trust is for people with developmental disabilities. So there's a little nuance. You can get Special Needs Trust or a supplemental trust set up by a private attorney for different disabilities, but this one specifically focuses on individuals that have intellectual or developmental disabilities. And this is kind of what we're going to tease out, is they're not necessarily, one is not necessarily better than the other. Holistically, they both protect the assets, so those resources. What neither one does is protect against income. And some benefit programs have what they call a dual benefit determination. So they got to look at both your assets and also the income that's coming into that household or that individual. And so both ABLE and the Special Needs Trust protects against those assets from being counted. So they get ignored, but it doesn't do anything about the income that may be coming into the household. And how you choose is really related to the person's situation. There's a various bullets on the slide to kind of tease out some of those. But the two programs, they're in federal law. They're turnkey operations in the sense that all you have to do is fill out some paperwork and away you go. You don't have to necessarily go to an attorney to get things set up. They protect the assets from the $2,000 resource limit. But something that is same for both programs is we can only take liquid assets, meaning we can't take jewelry, personal property, bond papers, stock paper, a home. So we can only take essentially cash, which we take through personal checks and various things. Please do not drop cash off at the office. But we can't, if you have a home that you want to protect in a special needs trust, then you do need to work with a private attorney to get that set up. Our programs, we can only take those liquid assets. But this person's situation is really going to determine which program works best for them. And frequently it is actually both programs can work in tandem for folks. And so that's a brief overview. Please use the chat box if you have questions that come up along the way as Tamara and I are talking. And for the most, Tamara and I are going to, it's kind of tandem, not so much like a wrestling match where we're going to tag off, but we'll describe each of our programs a little bit more in detail as we get into the nuts and bolts. And so I, as Peter Tassoni, I am the plan administrator for both the ABLE and the Special Needs Trust, but Tamara is the trust manager on the DD Endowment. And so she really deals with the ins and outs of the daily stuff. And I am more the big picture running both of these programs. But again, use the chat feature to put in your questions and we'll catch them along the way, and that way you don't forget your questions. But we'll definitely have time at the end to address questions. So let's talk about ABLE. So ABLE, you have to meet two criteria for the Washington State program. That's, you got to be a resident at the time that you enroll, and then the disability had to occur before age 26. With ABLE, you can move out of state, your family can move out of state. You just, at the time of enrollment, you just need to be a Washington State resident, because we used Washington State tax dollars to set up the program, so it's available to Washington State residents. But you don't, just because you move out of state doesn't mean you need to shut down the program. You can continue to use the ABLE account and the money from it anywhere in the United States and anywhere on the U.S. banking system. So here in Washington State, we have quite a few military families. So even as, depending on where they're posted overseas, as long as they're on the U.S. banking system, they can still use their ABLE account overseas. And the way to determine the second criteria, that disability before age of onset of 26, is the way you can determine it is that kind of that B criteria is either the individual's receiving SSI or SSDI, or they're eligible to receive SSI or SSDI. And that is, the Social Security Administration has already gone through and determined that individual meets their definitions and they're going to receive those benefits. So they've already made that determination of disability. The second piece is that list of compassionate allowances conditions. I mean, that's a mouthful, but Social Security has a list of, I think it's 273, 277 different conditions that meet the criteria for disability. And in Social Security's world, a disability means that you cannot work, lack of ability to work. And so military disabilities, some other disabilities criteria are a little bit different. For Social Security, it's about your ability to work. And that last is a self-certification. You can use a licensed physician, and that could be a GP or a psychiatrist, to actually certify the individual meets the Social Security's definition of disability. And so essentially we're talking about people are born with something, or something happens early in their lifetime to create that status of being disabled. And then once you meet that criteria, you're eligible to open up an ABLE account. And Tamara?
Thank you, Peter. So who can use the DDETF, the Developmental Disabilities Endowment Trust Fund? You'll hear us refer to it as DDETF or maybe perhaps just ETF. But there are 3 requirements for a prospective beneficiary to be able to participate in the DDETF. And that first one is that the prospective beneficiary must reside in the state of Washington at the time of enrollment. Similar to ABLE accounts, if the individual moves out of the state of Washington, it is still a viable special needs trust, and it would be able to move along with you. But at the time of enrollment, they do need to be a Washington state resident. Also, at the time of enrollment, the prospective beneficiary needs to be under the age of 65. And then the last one is that the prospective beneficiary must meet the state definition of a developmental disability as determined by the Developmental Disabilities Administration, the DDA. The individual does not have to be receiving services. We do understand that there are long wait lists, but they do need to have been evaluated and deemed developmentally disabled. I am going to take just a second and talk about the 2 types of accounts that the DDETF offers. There is a third-party special needs trust, which we call a Trust 1. So that's going to be mom or dad, grandma and grandpa contributing funds into the special needs trust for the benefit of the individual. And then the other is a self-settled, or what we call a Trust 2. And this type of account should have funds that only belong to the beneficiary. So you're going to expect funds such as a lawsuit settlement, an inheritance left directly to the individual's name. We do have a few individuals who work and who put some of their earnings in their trust. Peter and I will probably mention the trusts, the 2 different types a little later on. So I just wanted to take a moment and put that information out there. And there's a few differences between the 2, which there's another slide, but I just wanted to touch on them real quick. And then I'm done, Peter. Thanks.
And so you meet the eligibility criteria, you're enrolled in our programs, and this is the fun part. How do you spend your money? So both programs, there is 10 really big, broad, defined categories up there on the screen. And if you look at those categories, literally at any stage of a lifespan, you can make expenditures, whether it's, you're talking about a minor, a child in your household, a young adult, or an adult that's working, maybe an older adult living independently, or even seniors. And we truly, I think 83 might be the oldest, but we have people from we have infants all the way up through their 80s in the program. And those 10 buckets, really just about anything you can think of, you can spend it there. There are some nuances between the program. And Tamara, are you awake enough? Do you want to do the 3 asterisks, or do you want me to do them? I'll throw it up.
You guys don't know. This is a
change our rhythm. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah. No. Okay, the first asterisk, Peter always says, if you have really good eyesight, you can see the little asterisks. I'm going to borrow it. Thanks, Peter. And the first one is the basic living expenses. So in an ABLE account, an individual can use the funds in their ABLE account to pay for shelter costs and some basic living expenses. Shelter costs being rent, water, sewer, garbage, power, heat. Those services, or excuse me, those costs that typically your Social Security benefit should cover. And in a special needs trust, when the individual is receiving the basic SSI benefit, it is not allowed to pay for those without receiving some sort of in-kind reduction, that magical 2/3 thing you hear floating around out there about. So that's one of the differences between some of the expenditures that the 2 accounts, that in an ABLE account, you can use it to pay for basic living expenses. And in a special needs trust, you're not supposed to without receiving some sort of penalty. Housing, which I think is, you do basic living expenses and I clump them into shelter costs. So housing is the second asterisk technically, and I threw the shelter costs in there with it. And then the third one, while legal fees are allowed to be paid for out of a special needs trust, the really one that we're looking at is the burial. If an individual has an ABLE account and when they pass away, the funds in their ABLE account will be given back to the estate, correct, Peter? Yep. And those funds in the estate can be used to pay for burial after the individual passes away. In a special needs trust, where it is a legal entity, and when the individual passes away, it ceases to exist. So the trust should not be paying for costs or services after they pass away. So in a special needs trust, you'd really want to ensure that you're doing a prepaid burial plan. And that's where you would be paying for your burial, going and speaking to a funeral home, and making those prearranged services and needs. And that's how to do. And those are the three buckets.
Yep, you do really well. So also basic living expenses is groceries or like household cleaning supplies. So ABLE can pay for your groceries. Special needs trust does not. ABLE, if you're paying rent with your ABLE account, you just need to take the money out in the same month that you're paying the rent. Because if you take it out on the 29th and you pay the landlord on the 2nd, the local housing authority will count that money as a resource that was available because it went over the month. It was taken out the previous month. So the key here is take it out in the same month that you're paying the landlord. And if you need to renegotiate with the landlord, like, can I pay it on the 5th so I can take my money on the 3rd so I have enough time to get it to you? You might need to do that. And then, yeah, burial, and that could includes, you know, here at Washington State, you know, not only do we have also cremation, but we also have composting of human remains. So you just got to have all that stuff pre-designated in the special needs trust. And if you're able, this is where even the individual, the beneficiary, still needs to have a will to designate some of those expenses so that the ABLE plan can still pay after they pass in that roughly 60 to 90 day window before the state comes for the Medicaid recovery piece. So 3 subtle differences. And this is where some savvy parents, some savvy folks have already figured out, well, we have a daddy warbox in the family to set up that third-party trust, type 1 trust, $1 million there. And then I'll slide over money for rent into the ABLE account and use the ABLE account to actually pay rent to maximize the SSI cash payment that's coming to that individual. So that's one of the benefits of perhaps using both plans together. Just want to note this, as I know folks get a 12-month grace period for their COVID stimulus payments. I think Congress is currently working on a 3rd. We might even get a 4th one come late summer or fall, but that would be a great idea why you want an ABLE or DDETF special needs trust is to protect those funds for the long term. So something to think about. And then how to get the money out. There's little differences where ABLE is more of an online entity, think online banking or even your online credit cards, and DDETF is more paperwork based. But we have a prepaid card that you can transfer money, like a gift card. You can transfer that money onto the card and then take it to retailers or use it online, and you can do point of sale. And that could include co-pays to medical providers or dental services. You can transfer that money back to the bank account that's linked to the ABLE account and then go into your financial institution to take money out of that account or to write a check and pay for those various expenses, those 10 big buckets that we showed you. So those are what we call qualified disability expenditures. And you can also request to have a check actually mailed to the account owner in ABLE, the beneficiary. And you can either do that online, like I mentioned, or you could call the call center and they can help the individual walk through getting a withdrawal out and sent on its way. Tamara?
Getting money out of the DDETF, we call them disbursements. And all disbursements must be submitted in writing and on one of our forms. They need to be submitted to the ARC of Washington, the trust manager. All requests are reviewed by the trust manager and they are approved by the trust manager. Currently, the program is paper-based. It is only issuing checks and everything we need to see it all. So all requests need to be submitted in writing and they need to be accompanied with documentation to substantiate the request. So for an example, if you purchased a beneficiary a pair of shoes and would like to be reimbursed, you would fill out your form, submit it along with a copy of the receipt for the shoes, and then we could issue a check back to you to reimburse you for your purchase. Typically, we issue checks payable to vendors. So we're going to pay for a service, maybe for Comcast or for your phone, and they're mailed out. And we do ask that you allow up to 2 weeks for a request to be processed. It can go faster, but we do ask that you allow up to 2 weeks. Yeah, I think I covered them all.
This is a little bit another subtlety between the two programs is I like to think of ABLE as the wild, wild west and the DD Endowment, you having a trust manager. And maybe I use this term, but it doesn't apply to Tamara, of course, but the stodgy banker versus the wild, wild west. There's in an ABLE account, that money is the account owners and they have easy access to it and they can spend it however they want to, but you don't have to pay taxes and penalties if you're doing the qualified disability expenditures. So here's one example. You can't use your ABLE funds to go gambling, but there is nothing stopping an individual from taking the money out and actually taking it to go gamble with. So there are going to be penalties and taxes maybe owed on that. Well, the trust manager ensures that type of expenditure can never happen. And so that will never jeopardize those public benefit programs. So Wild Wild West, ABLE's great empowerment tool, but there are some risks. And for me, it's mostly those that might be fighting mental health or have a behavioral health diagnosis. They can be unduly influenced by the peers. And the same, for our folks that maybe have kids with DD, a similar thing. When they're out in public, they can be perhaps unduly influenced. Let me just get my cursor back down. And then prepaid card is a unique feature about it is not only do you have your transactional histories online that you can get if you ever need to substantiate how you're using it to the IRS during an audit, but you can also block specific vendors and almost all the way down to the an actual product. So if you have tobacco is my favorite one. If you're trying to quit tobacco, you can actually go into your prepaid card user account and eliminate, like smoke shops and also the tobacco products themselves. And at the register, they just won't bet you won't be able to pay for that with your card. So they'll separate out those items. You have to pay for your cigarettes somehow differently. And so with a trust manager and the ABLE, the Wild Wild West and the stodgy banker, the fees are a little bit different because of the amount of work that we're doing to support the beneficiary. So Tamara?
So with the Endowment Trust Fund, there are 3 fees that you'll see that an individual will incur by participating in the program. In parentheses, you'll see matched, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but I'm going to cover the fees first. So the first one is a $600 enrollment fee. This is a fee you pay to participate in the program. And then the other one is a management fee. The program is currently charging 1% of the account balance as the management fee. It is a minimum of $75, a maximum of $750. It's charged after 1 year's participation and annually thereafter. The third fee you see is the tax preparation fee. Currently, there are over 2,700 trusts, and we have a tax accountant, a CPA, who prepares the trust's tax returns for all of the accounts, and he's currently charging $75 per trust. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the matched piece. So back when the program was created in 1999, the state legislature gave the program an original $5 million endowment to be used to match, at the time, it was contributions into the account. Since that was launched, the program has had to suspend the 25% match on contributions, but it is still able to match on the fees associated by participating in the program. And currently the program is matching back 100% of the $600 enrollment fee. So once again, it's a fee you pay to participate in the program, but when the account opens, it will receive a $600 balance in state matching funds. The program is currently matching back the first $75 of the annual management fee, and it is matching back 100% of the tax preparation fee. So we like to think that if an account had a balance of $7,500 or less, it would be a free account to be managed. Whereas if the account had an $8,000 balance, it would see just, $50 or $5 in for the management fee that it would be charged to the account because it wouldn't receive that match. And then the last one that I skipped just because it doesn't really go with everything is a disbursement fee that an account could see. The governing board has allowed for each individual trust account to have 12 disbursements its calendar year. So in essence, a beneficiary or their family would be able to request a disbursement once a month from the account. For those frequent dispersers who are dispersing frequently, if they go over 12, they might see a $12.50 fee. So we count disbursements by events. Anytime we receive a request and that we have to pull the file to review it, that counts as one. That request could have up to, as many checks as it wants, but it could have more than one check at that time, and it would still only count as one. So anytime we have to pull it, if it's more than 12, any event would receive a $12.50 fee during its calendar year. Okay, Peter?
And with ABLE, there's no enrollment fee, so it's free, essentially free to get into the program with at least that minimum $25 initial contribution. But then we charge a $35 maintenance fee, so $35 each year just to keep the program open. And then depending on which of the investment options, which of those 4 investment options that we offer, you'll get charged a small percentage. And that is literally 0.3%. So that's very much less than 1%. Very similar, our ABLE program is very similar to the one across the Columbia River, just south of us in Oregon. We're partners in ABLE, and so our fees are almost identical. The benefits almost identical in the features. But this is what I referred to previously, the Wild Wild West. So if you can spend your money on a non-qualified disability expenditure, QDE, you're going to be assessed 10% penalty, and you'll owe any taxes on the earnings that was part of that purchase. So if you used $100 to go gambling and $20 of that was from earnings in the market, then you're going to owe the penalty on that $100, and you owe taxes on that $20. So try not to do that, but that's the IRS. They have to catch you doing that, and you owe them if they do. We think of ourselves as an online entity, and so everything comes out by emails. But if you do want your quarterly statements and other products or reports sent to you by mail, then we're going to assess a postage service fee against you for that. So with the DD Endowment, everything comes out by paper with some online service to view things, but there's no charge for the mailing. That's all part of that management fee captured by that. Next slide just kind of shows the various state legislation was signed by various governors at the time, but I see in the chat the 30 basis points or the 0.30 ask if that's an annual rate or a quarterly rate, and that's actually the annual rate. So they take it out, the various fees get taken out of your ABLE account by quarter. And so I think that's $8.75 for the administrative fee, and then that fee percentage basis points is taken out too. But good question. So we're both programs are talking annual fees. So the basis points and also the user management fee, that's per year. Any other questions? Record keeping, the pros and cons. Various state agencies here in Washington State may ask for records to substantiate what you're doing or to keep those public benefits going. And that could be either housing or even with your SSI through Social Security. It could be with the state agency. If you've got SNAP, which are the food benefits, DSHS, state agency might ask for receipts. And with the ABLE program, most of those will be online. You'll have a transactional history for your account, and you also have if you have a prepaid card, you have transactional history available online. But if your money is being transferred back to your checking account, then you have to rely on that financial institution's monthly statements or something. And you may want to be writing notes about how you're spending that money, just in case you should be saving all your receipts, but just in case some don't go through. You, the account owner, or if you're the parent helping the beneficiary of your ABLE account, you're the one that's responsible for keeping all the receipts and being able to explain the expenditure history of your ABLE account to whatever entity, whether it's state agency or the IRS itself. And so a lot of stuff's available online, but not everything. There are two things. At the bottom, there's the reports balances to the SSA or Social Security Administration monthly. And so all public benefit programs have an exemption for ABLE resources with the exception of SSI. So here in Washington State, you can save up to $500,000 in your ABLE account, and that will be always ignored by everybody except for Social Security and if the individual's receiving SSI. They only ignore that first $100,000. So let's say your account in a couple decades maybe grows up to grow to $105,000, and the individual's receiving SSI. So in that example, they'll ignore the first 100,000, leaving $5,000 of countable assets, and now that individual's over that $2,000 limit. And so either they need to go through a spend down, or their cash benefit's going to go down. And so we report to Social Security monthly just the balance in the account of ABLE, just so they can do that reconciliation, and then after that may trigger the caseworker to contact the recipient of the SSI to let them know that their assets are over. But that, $15,000 a year, we're decades away from that actually happening. But that is something that we do on the ABLE side. We do report that Social Security, and you, as the ABLE account owner or the person helping the person with their account, you're responsible for tracking all those receipts. So the special needs trust, there's an advantage there to having the trust manager.
That's true. And what Peter's talking about is that it is our responsibility to keep all those to keep good record keeping copies. And as you'll see, where it says statements and tax forms and disbursements, those are all mailed. So that's not an online thing. We make jokes that the DDETF is very paper-based, and that is no joke. So let's see. So I have a little ditty I like to tell here recently, and that talks about us keeping all of those records. So it was probably now we're getting close to more than a month ago, we had a family of a third-party trust where it's mom or dad's money, and they were going through a Social Security review, and Social Security wanted documentation verifying that all the contributions that came into the trust were in fact third-party and were not the individuals. And so I had to get into our wall of boxes and go and retrieve all of those contributions that the account had received throughout its time at the trust. And it was one of our older accounts. It had been around since, the early 2000s. And it was a lot of work, but we had all that information to provide to them so that they could give it to Social Security. That also works for disbursements. Quite frequently, Social Security and even sometimes HUD housing will ask for verification of what the trust is using the funds for. And you could be asked to provide that information to them. And we've had to provide that many a times for individuals. The program does not do any reporting to Social Security as it states down there. We don't do any monthly or any annual. Pretty much the only time we end up providing information to Social Security is at the primary representative, or excuse me, our point of contact's request. And the tax accountant prepares all of those tax returns, and those are mailed out to the point of contact in the file. So, and same goes for statements. Statements are generated quarterly, and they are mailed out. Here this year, it's so weird to talk about it. The program launched a online viewing for statements. Sometimes I even forget to talk about it because it's so new. And so there is a way for individuals to go in and view online the last 12 statements on an account. But we're still working with the IT folks, and it's not quite yet sophisticated enough to push out notices that they're available. So that paper copy that somebody receives will be a tickler that it's available online.
And so the Special Needs Trust, they file a tax record every year, and that's what she was talking about, gets mailed to the individual. In the ABLE, we do notify the IRS with the ABLE account and the balance every year, but it's up to the individual, depending on if they're using the ABLE funds for a non-qualified disability expense, that probably needs to be noted on their tax form, and then they will pay the penalty and taxes through that, which is a very complicated thing to do. But that is, we don't file a tax form on your behalf in an ABLE program like the Special Needs Trust does. We just notify the IRS, and you should receive what's called a 1099 form. You get some for interest, you get some for dividends, you get some for miscellaneous income, and I think it's going to fall under that miscellaneous form. But it's another 1099, so those may have started going out. We're in February. I think they need to go out by the end of the month and stuff. So that's the different record keeping that we have, online versus paper, and the various transactions that we are reporting on. The difference between the two is contributions. And Tamara, you can lead off here.
Sure. So for a special needs trust, there are no annual contribution limits, and there are no lifetime balance limits. And that is an advantage to a special needs trust. If somebody had more than the $15,000 ABLE limit, they would not most likely, but then a special needs trust is available for those funds to be accepted. Currently, the program is receiving checks. There is a way for you to do an online payment. It feels like an online payment from your perspective, but if somebody was interested in doing that, they would, if they did online banking with their banking institution, you would go on and establish or set up a bill pay. And it feels like an online transaction from your perspective, but what happens behind the scene is your bank will physically mail the program a check for it to be contributed into the trust account that you have with the Endowment Trust Fund. Because the program is a state program, it's in the state treasury's banking account, it is unable to go in and grab money from your account. So you need to push it out. And you'll see down there, it talks about how the trust manager is reviewing contributions to ensure they're going into the correct type of trust. So like we talked about I touched on earlier on about the different types of trusts. So whenever contributions come in, we're looking to ensure that third-party trusts are only accepting third-party money. So beneficiaries' funds should not be going into mom or dad's trust. If we, in fact, get a check that shows that somebody's trying to put a contribution in from a beneficiary, we're sending it back. And the same goes for the other way for the self-settled. We're ensuring that the funds coming in that belong directly to the beneficiary.
And the key is if there is commingling happening, it pierces the security of the trust, it violates. And so then all those assets are potentially going to be counted.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, so we don't want commingling. With the ABLE, we're limited to $15,000 a year in contributions, and that's based on the IRS gift tax allowance. Family and friends before you have to pay before you have to actually cite it, and then you may pay taxes on that. We have a $500,000 lifetime limit on contributions in Washington State, and that matches our college savings, the Dream Ahead program. So as college gets more expensive as the decades go by, I assume that ceiling will go up. And what I mentioned earlier about liquid assets is, again, we can only take paper checks, or you can set up a bill pay where your institution's pushing the money out, or you can set up an ACH, which is that electronic payment, or an automated clearinghouse, and you can either push that out to us, or you can set it up where we come in and pluck that out of your savings or your checking account. And then we also offer e-gifting, and this is an online gifting platform, and you could essentially run a GoFundMe campaign. So maybe the beneficiary would like to go on a vacation or go to a Special Olympics event. Well, you could set up a campaign, and friends and family send it out by email to friends and family, employers, everybody, and then they can make contributions using their credit or debit cards. So it's a really nice way to broaden and recruit for contributions. Yeah, if the individual is working for the next couple of years, at least, they can do an additional able to work contribution, and that's up to the $15,000 plus the federal limit for a one-person household or their earnings for that year. So that's another $12,760. So for a person who's earning that amount of wages, royalties, they could be potentially putting in $27,000 into an ABLE account between the standard and the able to work. So we also will reject any excess contributions. So if it's the month of December, grandma wants to give $5,000 in, but the beneficiary has already saved has already contributed $12,000 into the account. Well, 12 and 5 is 17. We're over the $15,000 limit. So we're going to reject that full $5,000. So hopefully grandma and the beneficiary talk and they realize, well, I have only $3,000 available before I hit that $15,000 limit. So grandma in December puts in 3, and in January is a brand new calendar year, brand new tax year. So then grandma can add the other $2,000 in the beginning of January to get that full $5,000 to her grandchild, and we meet all the legal requirements against that $15,000 limitation. The two programs have different investment options. Here in ABLE, we have 4 different options that the individual can choose between. And so it's a risk return ratio. So we have in the bottom, you see greens and reds, and those are just the variances between stocks and bonds. And as you know, with any type of investment in a market, there is a chance to lose money if the market goes down. The FDIC insured is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and they insure each deposit up to $250,000. And so that's a way to earn, you earn very little interest right now because the interest rates are so low, but it's insured against losses. So if the bank goes out of business, you're not going to necessarily lose that the investment there, that savings. Well, with the DD endowment, the governing board already made a decision for everybody and how the investment is going to happen. And that's a 60-40 split between stocks and bonds. And predominantly, we're using Vanguard mutual funds for all those investments. They're index funds, they're really low-cost funds, and that's the way to keep the cost of these programs down. But that is a difference. We had a question in chat related about after death, Medicaid recovery. So for ABLE, it is a thing. It will happen, but it's a tiered process. So even though ABLE can accept third-party money, first-party money, whether it's beneficiary's money, grandma's money, whether employers contributing directly to an ABLE account, once it gets into ABLE, it's all changes to first-party money. And as first-party money, that's the person's money. And so then the state can recover from that person for any Medicaid recovery or Medicaid services provided to that individual. You know, with ABLE, you can only do Medicaid recoveries for services that happened once the ABLE account opened up. So frequently, in Washington State at least, Medicaid recovery is mostly about people who are 55 or older and in assisted living, a nursing home. However, folks with DD, kids with DD, adults with DD, some of the DDA waiver services that are provided can also be recovered. And so for like my kiddo who's 13 with the developmental disabilities, you know, if he starts an ABLE account today and he happened to pass tomorrow, the ABLE account's only responsible for the day's services they may have provided. Everything that happened before he passed, that needs to be collected, could potentially be collected against the other assets of the estate. So Medicaid will happen against ABLE, but it's only for that time period for once the ABLE account got open and into the future. But it doesn't happen immediately. So within ABLE, the first 60 to 90 days, you have to pay any outstanding disability expenditures that you've taken on or that got spent, which can include those funeral expenses. And then the state will step in that second tier and collect for any Medicaid services provided. And then if there's any assets left over, then that can be dispersed to whoever's named in the person's will as final remainder beneficiaries. Now, these are potentially can be long-term accounts, and potentially people can be moving with their families out of state. And so if they do receive Medicaid services while they're out of state from that other state, that state can also collect against the ABLE account. So, you know, if we think 40 years from now, my kid who may have lived in 3 different states by then may have received Medicaid services in 3 different states, could have 3 states asking for Medicaid recovery. With the DD endowment though, it's a little different.
And it depends. There is a Medicaid recovery thing out there, but it depends what type of trust you have. So a trust fund, third party, mom or dad's money, these types of trust accounts are not subject to that Medicaid payback. So when the individual passes away, any funds remaining in the account will be dispersed according to how it is set up in the documents when the trust is established. Parent or families can choose to leave it to other siblings, other family members. We do have some folks who choose to leave it to other nonprofits or different agencies. But third party, mom or dad's money is not subject to the Medicaid recovery. That is not the case for the self-settled trust account. So a self-settled trust account, this trust two, when the individual passes away, the state is entitled to reclaim dollar for any services they received throughout their lifetime. If the individual has been receiving services for any length of time, it is highly unlikely that anything will be left over after the state submits their bill. I always like to emphasize that because I think people get caught up on filling out that disposition plan. And in my time, which has been since 2010, I have only ever seen 5 trust accounts that have had a remaining balance after the individual passed away. And we've closed over 200 self-settled accounts. Peter and I process those annual Medicaid recovery payments with the Office of Financial Recovery. I always want to say management, and I don't know why, but the Office of Financial Recovery. And some of those Medicaid recovery bills are $1 million. So once again, self-settled trust account, individual's own funds, subject to the Medicaid recovery, highly unlikely anything will be left over. And I think those were mine.
Yep, and there was a question in the chat about properly drafting your special needs trust, and that is very important when you're using a private attorney, because even if it's a third-party trust and they don't draft it correctly, it can still be jeopardized. That protection can be pierced depending on the wording in that trust. And so, but for our program, we talk with Social Security about every 5 years. We keep all our master trust updated, even though this federal laws may change. We're always updating it to keep that protection in place. So third-party trust, mom and dad's money, as what Tamara was saying, can never be used to pay for Medicaid recovery. It's only the beneficiaries, which leads me to the point of, yes, the beneficiary could have a life insurance, it could be named in an IRA, it could receive annuities, but the importance is not to name the individual. You have to name the trust account. The trust account is a legal entity. You just have to name it. So the trust account can receive mom or dad's life insurance or an IRA, even as an annuity or a lump sum. You just have to name it. If you name it to the child, then it becomes the child's money, and now you're forced to go into that self-settled route, which means Medicaid recovery is going to be a thing. So that's the importance of having that third-party trust set up and naming the trust to be the beneficiary of any type of program, like a life insurance or your estate, an inheritance, anything like that. So see if there's any other questions. This is the short fun part of the tour. Signing up with ABLE is you can just go to the website, which is Washington State ABLE, ABLE.com. So all spelled out, Washington State ABLE.com. If you have the information, it'll take you 10, 20 minutes to do it online. You could also just print the forms off and you can fill them in by hand and then mail them in, and then it'll take a little bit longer to get set up. You send in that $25 or more for the initial deposit, and that typically takes at least a week to clear, to settle. If you're mailing in your application and your check, it may take 2, maybe 3 weeks at the most to get set up. But once you're set up and your account's opened and the money is there, you can draw it out and take it all out if you needed to in 2 weeks' time. So it's really quick and relatively painless. And here's ABLE in Washington State. These are a number of accounts that we have based on counties, and essentially it's the I-5 corridor. That's where most of our folks live. And that, as a consequence, that's where most of our enrollments are, and that's what you're seeing. So the more green a color is or a county is, that's the more accounts that we have there. King County being our biggest county, and that's where we have our most enrollments. With DD?
With the DD ETF, it is a little different. It is not so, it's an older program, so trying to bring it up to, you know, current modern day technology hasn't exactly happened. It's still very much paper based. We have an enrollment packet that you need to have in front of you to be filled out by hand or maybe on the computer, and then turned back into the trust manager for review. If you were interested in receiving an enrollment packet, no, Abby, sorry, Kitty. If you were interested in receiving an enrollment packet, we have highlighted here on our website on the forms page where you could go. It is, you know, 30 some odd pages. So we're more than happy to mail it to you if you do not want to use your own printer, ink, and paper. That is not a problem. The individual filling out the document, primary donor, does need to have their signature notarized. And it would need a complete packet, notarized, would need to be submitted to the trust fund along with that $600 enrollment fee. We would go ahead and review it, check it out, and let you know if it all looked good. In addition, I missed the last piece. It does need to accompany that proof that the individual is a client of the DDA. If they are, then you most likely have something in your file, something like a ISP or an individual service plan or a planned action notice. Something like that could be submitted along with the packet as verification that they are a client of the DDA. If you were interested in making a contribution at the time of enrollment, you could submit another check for that initial contribution. And when I don't have anything about that. Best in 3 years. So I will take just a moment to talk about that. So that matching, that match on the fees that we talked about a few slides back, there are some requirements in order to earn that match. And the program asks that you contribute to the equivalent of $25 a month for a 3-year vesting period. It is a time and financial requirement. You could contribute all $900, which would $25 a month for 3 years. You could contribute all $900 on day one, but you would still have to wait the 3 years in order for the account to vest. You would see the account earning those matches during that 3 years, but they do not become a part of the account until it reaches the minimum balance requirement and the time requirement. I had something else I wanted to say, but I got talking about the vesting. Now I don't remember. It's lost.
Go back to you.
All right, I think
and
the heat map is, I think, the next one.
Similar to DD Endowment, similar to ABLE, and that most of the folks that are enrolled in the program are along the I-5 corridor, but they do have we have a bigger impact in Spokane County than ABLE does in the Special Needs Trust. ABLE is quickly growing, but we have 1,900 accounts, but only 12 million assets. The DD Endowment, been around 20 years, 2,700 plus active accounts, and probably $80 million in assets. The market has been pretty crazy, even with COVID going on, just different place. We have provided a one-pager, kind of compares the two programs. That's available on both our websites. It's a quick little teaser, I guess. It's a nice little framing of the two different programs. But again, they can be used well together. Mom and dad's money, grandma and grandpa's money can be put in that third-party trust, and then the earnings from the individual can be going into the ABLE account, and you can move trust money into the ABLE account as they need to spend, to buy groceries, make a down payment on a house, or things of that nature. There are other resources out there that can compare the two programs. This is a more generalized ABLE accounts nationwide, and Special Needs Trust as available nationwide. Tamara and I were talking specifically to Washington-based programs, but this is a pretty good webinar that was put on about a year ago. We know we can't answer everybody's questions. That's our contact information is up there. So please visit our websites. We have a lot of information available on them, frequently asked questions, lots of forms, explanations of processes that we use, email or phone. The ABLE also has a call center. We have various assisted technology so that folks can reach us in the medium that they want to talk or that's easiest for them to communicate in. The call center at the DD Endowment is essentially Tamara and her crew. But we're here to help. Making a decision as to which one of these or both of these to invest in can be daunting. And so we know it's usually a multiple touch conversation that we have with folks. So please give us a call, send us emails. We're not here to sell you on it. We're just here to educate that this is available for folks. And they both are really geared towards being low cost, focus on more of a lower amount saver. Most of our accounts are only in the thousands of dollars and maybe couple tens of $1,000s. We do not have $1 million trusts. We do not have $1 million ABLE accounts in our programs. We're geared towards people that are that lower the middle income that need to save a little bit of money to help out their beneficiary, have an enhanced life, to buy something that makes things go better for them in the future. There is a question in the chat if the presentation is available. I did send a PDF to the Peace Northwest, and I'm sure that they can email that out to you. If not, you can certainly email us and we can get it out to you too, along with, like Tamara said, we can email you the forms, or we can actually print out paper copies of the forms to send you to enroll. Any other questions, concerns, compliments?
I had this is Brenda. I had a comment, I suppose, and then maybe you could talk more about it. But for us little people that may not necessarily even have a lot to contribute to a trust, it's my understanding that it's important to have one, if for no other reason, because our families need to be aware that even if it's not about having the extra money, it's about being able to protect your SSI, which indirectly then, which is the main thing that we need to protect, is protecting our Medicaid.
Correct. Well, so even the DD Endowment, with that low fees, so once you get the $600 enrollment and the 1% management fee, if you're a small account, less than $7,000 is the most that you're going to have built up in the account, then essentially that account runs for free. ABLE, though it's really low cost, you're always going to have that $35 maintenance fee at a minimum, and then the 30 basis points if you're in the FDIC insured option. So if you really are talking about low assets, but long term, and to hold on to it for long term, like a couple decades, then the special needs trust is still a very good vehicle for that. But if you're going to burn through that money in just a couple of years, or you're going to have always a low, you may contribute $250 per year, but you're taking $200 out every year, then the ABLE is probably a better vehicle, because it's cheaper, it's much easier to get money in and out than a special needs trust, less paperwork involved. And both are going to protect, in particular, SSI and Medicaid from that asset limitation. But yeah, Brenda, good question.
We hear probably another super important piece is to have a will and to have it filled out correctly, to where you're not leaving funds directly to an individual who's receiving a Social Security benefit. You may not necessarily set up a trust while you're alive, but maybe perhaps that happens under the direction of your will, not providing legal. But I think we hear that quite frequently in the circuit to make sure that you have a will and that it's correctly filled out so that you're not jeopardizing the benefits.